How am I okay there? Oh, okay, sorry. Thanks, Brent. How the streetscape front yard might fit into that overall neighborhood. There was questions about parking, which hadn't been thought to the fullest extent last time. That again, there's some newer information. There's some, as part of the design concept, how I refer to them as eco-block, might fit in. This is typically, rather than an overall paved area with asphalt, where you would have, we use eco-block in public works in terms of stormwater management, where it creates a driveway into a storm pond that can be driven over, but still looks green, but provides all of that same support for vehicle movement on top. But you can either put gravel on top of it, crushed stone, or let grass grow on top of it. They work quite well. There was questions about the impact of the building to impact privacy and shadowing. Again, shadowing's been specifically addressed through looking at a sun shadow study. There was questions about the removal of shade trees. The revised site plan shows that there's no shade trees being removed on that north or west side. The only tree that has been removed actually was the half-dead apple tree that was in the middle of the lot. I tried to address some of the comments that were raised in terms of whether or not the variance was considered minor. There is no 10% rule underneath that definition of minor. It's each individual context needs to be looked at, whether or not a variance is minor, whether that's 1% or 100%. And I've dealt with variances in the past to the Committee of Adjustment that were 100% reduction in setbacks. So a 10%, there is no 10% rule. And I went through at some length in terms of trying to describe why the variance and severance does not conform. The question had been raised that the variance and severance do not conform to the West Heritage District guidelines. Again, I respectfully disagree with that comment, and tried to provide as best of my opinion to the committee's attention for their discussion and deliberation, and I would be happy to answer any questions. I know as well Mr. Clark may wish to raise some additional matters as well based on his planning report that a slightly smaller lot will fit into this, that a massing model has been shown that a small infill lot could fit in, and how it would go about doing that. How the established building line, although it's only shown for the 2 lots, typically it's 3 lots on one side of a street, so when you look at the larger estate house further south, that number comes into play and relates to the number which is being shown specifically for this infill house for its established building line setbacks. There are a number listed suggested conditions should the committee feel in favor of the application that still provides the level of certainty that would tie the application approval basically to the plans that we've seen, as well as to what we've used in many instances before for infill severance lots, which is a severance agreement which kind of ties much closer. It's not carte blanche to be able to build whatever you want, wherever you want, or cut down all the trees or those kinds of things. And whether a new owner or the current owner of this lot were to build on it now or 10 years from now, it doesn't preclude either slight changes, but also does not allow full ability to do whatever you want just on only the zoning. And still beyond all of that, there is still a heritage permit required for any new construction on this lot, whether it be in addition to the existing house or whether it be this new infill house. I'd be happy to turn it over to Mr. Clark in case he has any other additional matters he'd like to add. Or again, sorry, I'm just go back to my agenda to see then if there's the ability then for the applicants to speak as well before the questions of the committee as well.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Your planning staff have done a very thorough job, and it's not my intention to repeat or review a lot of those matters. And I know that both Cindy and Jim may have their own comments that they may wish to make. You have a copy of my planning opinion, and it's my opinion that this is very consistent with the provincial policy, which directs us to look at intensification within a built-up urban area. That, in my opinion, the proposal you have before you, particularly with the protections of the agreement and the heritage policy, protect the structure and character of the area. The height and massing and density have all been addressed, and the proposal, in my opinion, respects the streetscape. I do appreciate the fact that there is a cultural heritage requirement, and that a detailed assessment has been done which looked at this proposal and reached the conclusion that it was appropriate, that the new lot is in keeping with the neighborhood, both the lot sizes and the patterns, and it doesn't adversely affect the cultural heritage of the area. I wanted to make the point that your cultural heritage policy does look at and permits, in fact promotes development, and makes a point that that development should be of its own time, but it has to reflect the culture and the character. And that is something that we've certainly seen in other development in the area. Rob has already mentioned the trees, and the applicants have submitted a design which illustrates how they can respect the area. In my opinion, the consent that's being proposed meets the general intent and purpose of the official plan, and the variance, I believe, is appropriate. The variance and the lot design has been designed in such a way that it protects the adjoining properties, makes adequate separation and side yards for those properties, and therefore, in my opinion, the variance is appropriate and meets the general intent and policy of the official plans and the general intent of the zoning bylaw. With respect to compatibility, I think I wanted to make the point that the decision that the committee is addressing is whether or not it's feasible to build on the lot that's being proposed. But the precise design, and I know there have been a number of comments about design, is an issue that is not before this committee. The design of the structure that's going to go on the property is a matter that will be dealt with by the Heritage Committee, and through the agreement that is being proposed as a condition, it will provide an opportunity for review of such things as trees, drainage, and all of those other more detailed site design matters. Therefore, based on my review of the documentation that's been provided, it's my opinion that both the minor variance and the consent application are appropriate and meet the intent of the official plan and your zoning bylaw. I'd be more than pleased to answer any questions. Cindy and Jim, did you want to speak? If I may, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly. Mr. Chairman and the committee, on behalf of myself and my wife Cindy, I want to thank you for allowing us to speak today. As mentioned at the last meeting, we've been active citizens of this town and community for 30 years. During this time, we have renovated, even saved, some of the most important landmarks in Cobourg, including 198 Bagot Street and 202 Church Street, which was a 10-year project. We are here asking for your support in allowing the severance and minor variance as it meets the town of Cobourg infill lot requirements and has the support of the town planners. We will build an appropriate size and style home on the lot and will continue to work with the Heritage Committee and designers to meet their approval. We have even sourced a significant supply of 120-year-old red brick, since several of our surrounding neighbors said it was theirs as well as our preference. And we do want to respect the heritage and nature of the street. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Barry?
My first question, one of the reasons this was deferred last time was to give you the opportunity to consult with neighbors and let people know what you were proposing. And I don't see, there's nothing in Rob's report which answers that question about what's happened in terms of public consultation since. Not that you need their approval, but what, I see you have one letter of support from a neighbor across the road, which is a good sign. But I just would like to know what sort of consultation you have been through. Thank you.
Absolutely. My name's Cindy, thanks. I actually am in a bulk email, and I am in regular contact with everyone. As soon as anything comes, we talk all the time now. The neighborhood is much more comfortable, except for one neighbor. They're all in agreement. They just wanted to see what was to be built, but they were not willing to put it on paper, which is fine. But that, except for the one across the road, as you see. But we are in regular contact, so it's not a problem that way. So if that, and every step of the way, I've been bulk emailing everyone, and they get back and we talk back and forth, if that helps.
Okay.
That's great. I have a combined question. I think it's for the Hendersons and for Rob. We have a conceptual version of what's to be built, and I understand, you know, that it's got to go through the design process. We're not here to talk about design. But Rob, since you've put the stipulation in the request in the variance portion of this, that it has to be substantially like that, I'm trying to be sure I understand what that means in terms of how much that curtails the final product. Because, for example, my understanding is without this stipulation, for example, you could build something much larger on this lot in terms of, because of the lot size and the density and so on in the area. My understanding is what's being proposed is smaller and lower than, in fact, what could be as of right, assuming that there wasn't the issue of the variance on the lot. So in exchange for the variance, basically, what seems to be happening is the size of the house is being constrained. It's basically a story and a half, seems to be what we're hearing. And it's not going to actually consume the full entitlement for the lot. Is that a correct interpretation of what's happening here?
The houses on either side of the proposed house are a story and a half. They're not 2 stories. We are having the exact height of roof line, and that is the house we would like to build, barring Heritage Committee says yes. We are lovers of heritage, always have been, and I would like to actually use 120-year-old brick to look like it's always been there. That will, of course, come down the road. But we are wanting to build a 20-foot by 24 deep. Our current house is 24 wide, just so that you have a scale. And this is a 20-foot by 24 deep with an 18 by 18 addition at the back. We want a small home for growing old. We started on Bagot Street. We're ending on Bagot Street. Mm-hmm.
Rob, just further to my question, though, the issue in your recommendations saying substantial, I always wonder what this means on the ground when you say it's substantially as shown. Again, it's not the design as shown. I'm assuming it's the massing, height, kind of the feel of it in terms of what's being proposed. So that if this got changed to something more major, they couldn't because of the stipulation within the agreement. I'm trying to understand how binding, what this binds in your recommendation.
That's correct. So whether it became a story and a half without getting into then and adding on to modifying the variance to say it's only a certain height, the Schedule A drawing would be that schedule that would be attached to a development agreement. We may show a concept plan for the house, but it wouldn't necessarily be tied to a 1.5-story Ontario cottage, for example. It's more that lot layout, because the specifics of that 1.6 meters, that little over 5 feet distance to those side yards is important. It protects those trees to the north. It is in keeping with the house to the south, those kinds of things. So that would be what we would be looking for substantial. But if they came back and wanted a slightly different rear or a different porch, but that it had a porch, those are things that would be, so that's where you get into substantial.
So you're trying to deal with the things that are strictly related to the variance, to a slightly narrower lot in terms of the way this is being cited and dealt with. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct. It's that overall height and massing of a building. It's not the specific concept building itself.
I
in terms of
understand
that.
that.
Yeah, and that would be the kinds of things that we would tie that, just because, again, those are the kinds of things that you can tie into a severance agreement. I think trying to get into that higher level of detail to say, well, it's Ontario Cottage, well, it better be gray and white, because that's what the concept picture showed. I don't want to get into that level of detail. So that's certainly not the level that I would be comfortable with trying to tie the land to. Those don't work, and again, although it might not be these folks, I always have to look with that lens on that. Although that's the intention, something could happen and all of a sudden those intentions change, and all I've got left is that severance agreement 5 years down the road when someone comes in for a building permit or goes to the Heritage Committee for a heritage permit for a new structure. And I don't want to get tied into too much, but I also do not want to then all of a sudden be looking at a because it's a deeper lot. I wouldn't want a 24 by 80 foot deep house because that's the building envelope. Those kinds of things.
Okay, the reason I'm raising it is I think it was clearly one of the concerns of the neighbors expressed in the earlier meeting. And I think though you can't get wed to this design, that's not the intent. The notion of that it will be a small, relatively small and well-placed house in the lot is, I think, that's why we're trying to deal with that consideration. One thing I was wondering, the existing house on the lot at 170, is it designated or not? It's not designated.
It's in a heritage district, so every house is designated when it's in a district.
Yes.
Whether it's a modern house or a heritage home.
Right.
One of the things that happens with when a district comes in place is it overrides any individual designation that would have been there previously.
Right.
So within the West Heritage District, all houses are designated, as would any new infill be.
Okay, and again, we keep losing in this discussion. One of the reasons for the variance is that the lot size, the lot width is constrained because of the existing house that's there. Were that not the issue, the total frontage of the lot is more than enough to split into two oversized lots, basically. But what's being proposed here is to try and... Okay, I'm too close? Sorry. What's being proposed here is try to accommodate the retention of the existing house for the future, and hence you get into that distance argument. And coming back to your argument on minor, my determination of minor is the impact on what happens around it. And in this case, if the lot were the 35 feet, you'd have a wider house. It doesn't really impact what happens on either side. This variance, the way this has been structured, more impacts the width of the house itself. That width of the house itself is constrained, but the issues of setbacks and so on are the same. Even if it were a standard 35-foot lot, you'd have a 3-foot wider house. I mean, that's kind of what we're dealing with. Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Alan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess firstly, I'd like to direct this at the planner. Given what Barry has just spoken of, I'd like to, in my mind at least, be clear on what Schedule A represents to us. It is what we are deciding upon as far as the minor variance, is that correct? The revised Schedule A concept plan? That layout of the foundation of the house on the proposed severed lot, that represents the minor variance that's being sought, correct?
That's correct. In this instance,
The concept is a separate and different issue. Okay.
That's correct. In this instance,
So,
it's the variance from
given that
11 to 9.88.
Okay. Given that this is the minor variance proposal, here's the concerns that I have. Firstly, the house is set back beyond the setbacks of the adjoining properties. So it's sort of deeper into the lot. Given the configuration of the proposed severance, it doesn't allow the new build to be parallel to the street. It is angled. So in my mind, that has some reflection on the symmetry of the street, and consequently, does it, you know, I'm concerned about the fit that it's creating. I understand if you turned that house on the lot in order for it to be parallel to the street, then you're going to have other minor variance issues at the back end of the house because you'd be too tight to the lot lines. But another concern, and I think this is quite a valid one, that house is 20 feet wide, that foundation that's shown is 20 feet wide. You have a parking area that's 17.7 feet wide. That actually represents 89% of the width of the house. To me, that parking area with cars in it dominates the front facade of that house. I just don't see how you're going to get around it, but I think it's not exactly a positive aspect. I think it's detrimental to the overall design. I think it's detrimental to the symmetry of the neighborhood, and obviously there's no other options available, are there? Was there any consideration given to siting the house differently so that it was parallel to the street? Or was that never a consideration?
Well, I think that the minor change that you're talking about, that it's not quite parallel, I don't know that you would see that by eye. It's
We're already dealing with minor variances, whether we have to change it and add one here or there, I think is really not that significant. But don't you think it would be relative to the whole process if that house lined up with everybody else, as opposed to being almost kitty corner and shoehorned in there?
Well, it's somewhat challenging because the property lines aren't square to the street either. So, I mean, that's part of the issue, the old town, in terms of you have streets that are like this and you have property lines that are like that. They're not square, they're on an angle. So it's somewhat of a challenge, necessarily.
I understand that.
Making it completely square, flush. I think the overall distance, you know, and again, I'm looking at the dimensions to the proposed front porch, and although that southerly one isn't dimensioned specifically, it's a foot or two. I don't know that you would see that, particularly once you start putting a car in front and a tree or some shrubberies. I don't think you would even notice that it's that difference.
Well, that parking area truly dominates the front of that property, and you know, you put two cars in it, and I'd be hard pressed to know there was a house there, but nonetheless, that's the concept. So, but I just think it's not ideal, and I don't know what other options would be available given that you don't have room for parking. But anyway, that's my thinking.
Any other questions? Yes. Go ahead.
I think my response to your comments, and I accept those as your legitimate concerns, is that the houses on the street are not themselves all strictly parallel to the street, and the treatment of the parking area has been specifically addressed so that it does not introduce a paved area to the front yard. So it's only when there would be two cars there. And my experience with that particular street is it's pretty much dominated by parked cars. Unfortunately, cars were not something that were accommodated in the history and when this was designed and developed. And thus, we have to deal with that reality today. The reason for the two cars, obviously, is in order to have zoning compliance. But they've been very careful in the design to make it so that it's not as intrusive as it could have been through the treatment of the surface and also through the fact that they've limited the access to those parking spaces. Thank you.
Mr. Delaney.
Thank you, Chair. And this is, I guess, addressed to the planner and also, I guess, to Mr. Clark. Dealing with the parking, I kind of know firsthand about parking because I grew up on Bagot Street a long time ago, many decades ago. And I know the parking at that time, most people, and I think they still do, on my mind's eye, maybe not, but had parking that was usually at the rear of the house, of the houses all up and down on Bagot. It may have changed by now, but I recall that. And that's why, again, I guess Alan's really brought it to the fore. Parking in front is, this is a heritage district. And a heritage district, when you start parking 2 cars in front, it really does impact in a negative way about the heritage district. And that is a concern of mine. And I really come back, I guess, and I guess our planner has said it's a minor variance. But I look in a heritage district, we're not talking about a subdivision out in the east end of Coburg or on the west end. We're talking about a heritage district where we're saying we're going to reduce it, the front, by 10% or more. I think it's just a bit fraction one way or the other. And we're saying this is just a minor variance, and I can't get my head around thinking that's a minor variance in a heritage district where it's going to mean we'll end up parking cars in front of the dwelling. Just my comments. And I don't know whether the planner would like to go back under the minor variance and convince me that it is minor, because I don't see it. Thank you, Chair.
I would like to make some comments. I would like to perhaps discuss the role of this committee. I would say that we are not the Heritage Advisory Committee. This process has to go through the Heritage Committee, and final decision would end up in the hands of council. I view our role as being one that we are looking at the planning aspects of this. Is it meeting provincial guidelines, etc.? And all I'm hearing is a lot about heritage. If this were in some other area of the town, we would be passing this very, very quickly and easily without any issue. But here, because it's in a heritage district, a district that also has some lots of this size, we are becoming, I believe, confused in our role. I believe our role is to look at this from a planning aspect, far less so than from a heritage aspect. This still, if this didn't have to go through the Heritage Advisory Committee and through council, then I would say we have some responsibilities here. But in this case, since it does have to go through that, I don't see that. So that's just my comment.
Mr. Chair, if I could respond to your comments. Our reports are pretty much including what we've gotten for today's meeting. The majority of this material keeps referencing the heritage aspect of this. If this was not something that would play into our consideration, then perhaps it should have never been part of the report. If we are simply to be dealing with planning matters, yes, that is our role as a committee. So why does everything get congested with the heritage issues? I didn't prepare the report. It came from other parties. But the heritage issue does have an influence in the thinking of everyone in some way, shape, or form. You can't avoid it. But nonetheless, you're absolutely correct. We are here to deal with planning matters under the Planning Act. And the Planning Act specifies that for a minor variance, you must satisfy 4 tests. Is the application minor? Is the application desirable for the appropriate development of the lands in question? Does the application conform to the general intent of the zoning bylaw? Does the application conform to the general intent of the official plan? I think in 3 or 4 of those instances it does. But there is one that I think is open to opinions, and this whole process is opinions. Opinions of the planner, opinions of the consultant, opinions of individuals on the committee. And I have an opinion that the second test is not being met because a number of people feel that this application is not desirable for the appropriate development of the lands in question. So I'll leave it at that because I think that is a relative point.
I would also like to add that the number of people who were dead set against this has been reduced significantly between the last one and this one. Okay.
I think I'm perhaps in the middle of the two of you. There is a heritage aspect to this in terms of the lot size and development, and I think there's plenty of information in the analysis that's been done to show that, first of all, this type of severance is consistent with what's happened in this area over time. The lots across the road, for example, when this house was built, there was a single schoolhouse there, and that it's been subdivided subsequently into a series of smaller lots. So that's been the history of this area, where bigger lots get subdivided into smaller lots. The second issue in terms of the heritage aspect, in terms of the area, there's been a comparison. There are a number of other lots that are of this size and nature. So this isn't a stranger in the neighborhood. So if every lot in the neighborhood were 50 feet, for example, and we came along and said this is 32, I would be the one arguing this is out of character. But I think the only character of the area is that there is no consistent lot size for this area. So I think that is part of the heritage aspect of this. So you can turn it around whichever way you want. But I think also we have to be cognizant when you're looking at, is this desirable for the area? If this is not done, what is the future of this property and this lot for the overall lot for the future? What's likely to happen in terms of preservation of the current house and all the rest of it? If I were a developer, I'd be arguing to tear down the existing house and split, build 2 completely new houses, go through the whole heritage process and fight it through. You have an existing owner who's saying here, there is a heritage house, we want to acknowledge it, we're trying to stay away from it, we're treating it properly. And again, we also on the variance, the existing owner is one of the affected owners of it. You have the unusual circumstance where their lot is one of the impacted lots by this new development, the residual lot. And in terms of the variance, we're only dealing with the lot frontage. It meets the area requirement for a house on this side, the lot size. So it's only the frontage issue that applies and in terms of the variance. And I think with the conditions that the planning staff have put on it to make sure that this is something that's within reason, given the nature of the lot, trying to accommodate the fact that it's to allow reasonable separation from the adjoining houses and all the rest of it. I think those things have all been dealt with as part of the process. And again, you're quite correct. You know, it's easy to get into design and zone. The only reason I was raising it was as a stipulation in the variance in terms of what that is supposed to mean. It's not that we're saying this is the design. You may end up doing something very different than this, I don't know. But conceptually, this is kind of the size and, you know, sort of thing we're trying to fit in here so that the neighbors can see that you're not proposing a 3-story, you know, something with a garage on the front or something. I mean, you are trying to fit in. But you're going to have to go through the whole heritage process anyway as part of this. So I think you're both right to some degree, but I think the heritage aspects have been considered in this very fully by the reports on that have been done, by the staff work that's been done, and by the external consultant who, at the last meeting, we went through all the comparison with lots and so on in the area and the way the area is developed. And you've got a very long history of land development in the area as part of the report, which clearly shows that there's been a pattern of doing this. I think we can't forget also that where you're dealing with larger houses in town like this that are heritage, you need to come up with some creative solutions because they're going to be endangered because most people don't want something of that size necessarily now. And there have been a couple that have been around, people trying to sell for some time because they're beautiful houses, but does somebody want something of that size with that size of lot? So we have to think in terms of the implications of trying to, as I think the owners here are trying to do, to say, we want to preserve what's there, we want to build something smaller as an infill, and it solves both. So.
Any other discussion? Yeah, Mr. You want to make a comment?
Check. Mr. Delante, I just wanted to address one of your comments to begin with. You mentioned that you thought the parking was behind the houses on Bagot Street. To my knowledge, there's only one house that has parking at the back of the house. It's all on the street. Across the street from us, our house, the house to the south, and most of the houses, to my knowledge, it's all either on the street or in parking lots in front of the house, in the front yard. So
I think what Mr. Delante was referring to was many, many decades ago when he was, when he was a young man. Do we have any further discussion? And I call for the question.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move the recommendations of the staff report.
Do I have a seconder for that? I will second that. All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, the motion is not carried.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I just want to go back to that. So there's two Committee of Adjustment recommendations, right? The first one was with the minor variance, which is the AO2 2020. Planner, I just want to make sure this is correct, that we should probably vote on them separately. So I just want to make sure that...
Officially, it should be two motions. There's two official decisions. One would be the variance from the 11 to 9.88. The second one would be the severance.
I'm happy to so move on both.
Excuse me, but if one of the motions, the first one that's itemized as the minor variance, if it doesn't get approved, the other one is of no consequence. Is that correct?
Rob, would you like to answer that?
I can see the member's point in terms of if without the variance in place, that the severance fails because it doesn't meet the intent of the zoning bylaw. The committee will need to, as part of its motion of defeat, then put forward its rationale, specifically why.
Just so that we don't get ourselves tangled up, would it not be wise then to vote on each of them separately anyway? I'm happy to so move each of them separately, and you can vote on them separately. I think the outcome will be the same, but for the record, then it'll be quite clear that the variance was turned down and the consent was turned down by a 3-2 vote. Are the members of the committee happy with that? The result will be the same. It just, in case there is any dispute as to whether by doing it in one or doing it in two causes an issue, this way we know for sure. So I'm happy to move the requested variance as indicated in the staff report. Bob, are you going to second again?
I will second that.
We'll vote on that then.
All those in favor? All those opposed? That motion is not carried.
Okay, and I'm happy to move the consent as set out in the staff report.
I will second that. All those in favor? And those opposed? The vote remains the same, and the motion, or the application, is rejected.
Now, as to the, Mr. Chair, as to the why it was rejected, I would request that the three members who voted against, among them, come up with the rationale they'd like to put forward, a brief rationale that we can put with the decision document. And Brett, what does that mean about the signing the decision?
Well, I would be prepared to offer something, whether the other two
Well, perhaps you could
are-
draft it, Alan, and they could concur?
I'm sorry?
Perhaps, Alan, you could draft it and get their
Here,
concurrence?
Get back from the mic.
Oh, sorry. I'm too close. Perhaps you could draft it, Alan, and they could review it and give you their comments?
That's fine. Could we take a recess and we could compare notes then?
Okay?
Okay. Okay, the meeting is recessed for 10 minutes.
Is there somewhere the three members could go to, so they're not, okay. I don't think it's fair to the three members to be having their discussion publicly. I think they have the option, should have the option to do it in camera and to come back with their recommendation.
You have 10 minutes. Okay, the decision has already been made. However, the dissenting members would like the opportunity to present the rationale for their decision. And Peter, you are representing that group? You might want to take off your mask so we can hear you.
Chair, the three of us met as requested by the deputy chair, that we come up with a rationale. And the rationale is, as pointed out by another member of the committee, that there are 4 tests that we go by. It meets 3 of the 4 tests, this application. It does not meet the 4th test, which is it desirable for the appropriate development of the lands in the question? That's what we all agreed on, was the one area where we felt it did not meet that criteria of the test. And that's what we're presenting to you, Chair, and the committee as our reasoning.
Thank you very much. In that case, I'll motion to adjourn.
So
Peter?
moved.
Seconder? Barry? All those in favor? We're done. Thank you very much.
Brett, signature documents, what's going to happen? Oh, you've got them, okay.